Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. This is Season 10, Episode 8, and I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today we have the pleasure of introducing you to Kat Robinson, a celebrated cookbook, food writer, and historian. With numerous accolades and accomplishments, Kat Robinson is a force to be reckoned with in the world of food and history. She's a founding member of the Arkansas Food Hall of Fame Selection Committee, a co-chair of the Arkansas Pie Festival, and the author of several cookbooks and books about food. Kat has also been featured on TV as a traveler, producer, and instigator. In this podcast episode, we'll get to know Kat Robinson and her incredible journey. I'm going to take you now to my conversation with Kat Robinson. Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. Today, I am very honored to be talking with Kat Robinson. She is a food historian, TV host, traveler, producer, and instigator. Kat, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I know for a lot of people who know who you are, this is going to be a dumb question, but for our listeners who are not familiar with your work, can you tell us where you are from, where you grew up?
I'm an Arkansasier. I have lived in Arkansas almost all of my life. I grew up and still live in Little Rock, went to school at Arkansas Tech in Russellville, got my first television job in Jonesboro, and my family's from a little spot in the road in southwest Arkansas called Gurdon. But I consider all of Arkansas my home.
Now, my family, my dad's side is from Leachville. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
Yeah, that's where they're all from. They picked cotton there and stuff back in the day.
Oh my goodness,
They all move out to San Diego back in the 50s. So.
Not much cotton in San Diego.
No, a little bit different. So I always like to ask people that are on the program about early influences. Now, were there any relatives or mentors that kind of taught you cooking as you grew up or kind of taught you about food when you were young?
When I was in my single digits, it was just me and my mom, and she worked a lot. She was an LPN, and she managed to keep food on our table. But on the weekends, I'd spend time with both my sets of grandparents, and in particular, my grandma Bear is a lot of where I get my cooking influence from, not just from cooking itself, but she had a 2-acre garden that she kept up with all sorts of beans and gourds, tomatoes. Pretty much any time between April and October, she was out tending the garden, and I was expected to comply as well. In fact, up until the age of 11, my thumbs every summer were permanently purple from all the purple hull peas that I would shell. I'd spent a lot of time with her, but not thinking I was going to pick up anything. I mean, when you're a kid, you don't really know. But the memories that I have of my grandma are definitely those of cooking, particularly waking up in the morning to hear the pounding noises. She would pound flat pieces of venison that she'd pull out of the freezer the night before. That was our breakfast meat. Instead of bacon or sausage during the winter months, it was subsistence living. And so chicken fried venison steaks or something I grew up on. There's a lot of that to what I remember from my grandmother. My aunts to a point, sure. But strangely enough, a lot of my influence as far as my love of researching food goes back to the television shows that I used to watch whenever I was a kid. The Frugal Gourmet with Jeff Smith, and of course, Justin Wilson, who The Taste of Louisiana, all of these great programs. I adored these and watched them on my local PBS station. And I never really thought that I would get into cookbook writing per se, but as far as being a happy diner, I was glad to learn about everything about where my food came from and how it was made.
Now, where did writing come in for you? I know a lot of people have an epiphany moment, or they always kind of felt like they always have been a writer. Where did you get the idea at a certain point that this is it for you? You're going to be a writer?
Strangely enough, I was in the 6th grade. And it just clicked for me. But I didn't expect to be a cookbook writer or even a restaurant writer. I thought I was going to go to Hollywood and write television shows or write screenplays for movies. And so the very first thing that I wrote whenever I was a young woman was a cop movie. I didn't know anything about police procedurals other than watching old episodes of Dragnet and seeing Beverly Hills Cop and other movies like that at the theater. But I thought, well, I'll sit down. I'll write a buddy movie. Let me try that again. So I'll sit
Okay, I
down
can note that.
and write myself a buddy movie, a cop buddy movie. And it was awful. It was absolutely awful. But it got me into writing down conversations. And so I wrote tons of conversations whenever I was a kid, real conversations in my head, screenplays. I thought that was the direction I was going to take. By the time I got to high school, though, everyone around me was like, you'll never make a living as a writer. Nobody makes a living as a writer unless you're like Stephen King. So go get yourself a practical job and you can write on the side. So I actually went to college to be a band director. And I kept writing. I wrote bad poetry like, a lot of high school folks do. But I also wrote a lot of just everyday scenes and stories that I heard. And by doing this repetition, I kind of built into it. Strangely enough, I came out of Arkansas Tech with a journalism degree, ended up in television after spending 4 years in college in radio. And that's where I started writing the news every single day. So you could say I never stopped writing. I just kind of changed my genre from time to time.
Your resume is quite accomplished. Your work has appeared in regional and national publications, including Food Network, Forbes, Travel Guide, Serious Eats, and AAA magazines, among others. And your expertise in food research in Arkansas restaurants has been cited by Saveur, Eater, USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, The Outline, and Southern Foodways Alliance's Gravy podcast, with your skills and talents related to food research and documentation. What has this been like for you to, be all over the map with your work? Has this been quite thrilling?
In many ways, yes. A lot of it's because I'm just ornery like that. I let my tenacity push me forward. When I started food writing in 2007, I spent the previous 12 years as a television producer. I wrote the news every single morning. And I was used to writing a great deal of content. But whenever I got out of television production, it was like I'd started completely over from scratch. I could point to years of top-rated television shows that I had written for, but I couldn't really show my clips. So I started at the bottom, and I contacted the University of Arkansas Cooperative Extension Service. I wrote for the little magazines that you get for free after you check out at the grocery store. And I bugged people. And I started first with the Arkansas Times, just saying, hey, I've got something going on. And they ended up hiring me to write Eat Arkansas, which was the food blog for Arkansas food lovers. And that was fun. That ended up getting me to notice of Serious Eats. And I figured out after a while, if I bugged a publication enough and I kept sending them pitches and saying, look, I know something about this and I want to talk about this, I got the attention. After 5 or 6 years, I started getting contacted direct by these publications because they'd see my byline come up in other publications, say, well, it looks like you might know something about Arkansas food. Can you write about this? And it grew from there. In fact, the way that it germinated, because so after I bugged the tar out of Food Network to make some corrections on their site, they ended up hiring me to do city guides for them. Forbes Travel Guide contacted me out of the blue. And after a while, I ended up getting people that contacted me just because they saw my byline other places. I think a lot of that turns out to be that it's far cheaper to hire somebody in the state of Arkansas to go out and do the story than to have somebody from one of the coast come and fly in and do the research themselves and fly back out. I was the cheaper option. And after time, I became the best option because as I did more stories about Arkansas food, I expanded my knowledge base just extensively. I didn't mean to become a food historian, but it kind of happened to me.
Now, I have a question that's going to be A very either easy or difficult question. I'm not sure, but what is Arkansas food?
So I got an entire book on that. So the short of it is Arkansas food. Arkansas is a crossroads. We are viewed upon by other regions as, oh, well, y'all just pick up a bit from here and there, and there's some truth to that. But we actually have several distinctive regional plates, micro cuisines, as it were. But there are some communal lots. We are very big on our fruits and vegetables. That's a surprise to people who just see us from what the national publications have said in the past, which is like when they notice us, they notice three things: cheese dip, fried pickles, and chocolate gravy. There's so much more. Now, I started with pie whenever I started spreading the word about what's popular here in Arkansas, because pie is the common denominator. You will find pie at pretty much every restaurant in the state. I mean, you can go into barbecue places and there's a fried pie, or you can go into a Chinese buffet and there's a case of pies at the end of the buffet next to the soft serve ice cream. It's truck stops and bakeries and little holes in the walls and craft stores and flea markets, and you'll see pie everywhere. But that's not all there is to it. We love rice. In fact, we are the largest producer of rice here in the state of Arkansas. There's more rice grown in Arkansas than in all other 49 states. We ship rice to other nations. That's how much rice we make here, and we love
Wow.
it. Yeah, and it's something that people don't think about. We also, our heritage is very much stuck in our wild game. If you are from Western Arkansas, it's deer. If you're from the Delta, it's duck. Everywhere there's fishing. We have 9,700 miles of rivers and streams in Arkansas, and some of the most amazing lakes out there, like Lake Washita, where you can wade in up to your neck and see your toes. It's so clear. It's a wonderful place. If you cut off Arkansas from the rest of the world, we would survive just on what we have right here. But there's also the crossroads aspect. We're very big on highway culture, bringing food into the state and bringing it across the state. And then, of course, we have our immigrants. In fact, the dish of the Ozarks, as it were, is fried chicken and spaghetti. That comes from, of all things, a whole bunch of folks from Rome that were recruited to come over by the mayor of Rome and a New York banker who bought land in Southeast Arkansas, brought these folks, had them naturalized in New York City, sent out to New Orleans, brought up the river to what is currently Lake Village, Arkansas, and sent out to the Sunnyside Plantation. And these folks from Rome used to all their great hills and mountains and having tomatoes and grapes and all this fantastic stuff get dropped in a swamp and deal with mosquitoes and have to learn how to subsist there, thanks to folks that were already living there, thank goodness. But within 5 years, they're like, we're done with this. And a bunch of them picked up and moved to Northwest Arkansas to a place that they named Tontitown after the first Arkansas traveler, Henri de Tonty. And there they still grow grapes, though most of them go into grape juice production. And they have a festival each year that is the Tontitown Grape Festival. And they have this dish, this fried chicken that they learned while they were in Southeast Arkansas, that they put alongside spaghetti from Rome. And it's just remarkable. And it's these kind of stories. All of our food is influenced by this wave after wave of immigrants, of people who come in on horseback or steamboat or highway. They all come here. And so our influences are widely varied. And it means we have an extraordinary culinary landscape that continues to develop year by year by year. It is an exciting place to be as a food lover and as a food historian too.
When I was young, my relatives would always go back to family conventions in Arkansas, and they would always bring back a lot of things. And one thing they always brought back was little earthenware jugs of sorghum. And I used
Yes.
to love to get into the sorghum when that came back. And they always put it on biscuits and stuff. And I just loved it. Is that something that's very local with Arkansas?
If other states really appreciate sorghum the way that Arkansas does, I just don't see it. Now, I do know other places, particularly in Memphis barbecue, you see a lot of places that use sorghum molasses in their actual barbecue sauce. But that being said, sorghum is a flavor. When I grew up, I hated it. My mom
Yeah.
loved it. She would have it directly on biscuits with butter. And there was something about that bitter note I could not tolerate. But as I grew older, I developed appreciation for this nice homegrown sweet that would, yeah, seeing sorghum cane actually pressed. In fact, I've got a copy here in Arkansas Food. I've got some images of the whole sorghum producing process. What was funny about that particular day, that happened at the Parker Pioneer Homestead up in Harrisburg, which is a really neat facility. It's only open in October of each year, and they show traditional harvesting methods, and it's a really neat little community there. But I took my daughter, and I wanted to introduce her to sorghum too, because while she had tried things that had sorghum molasses in it, the idea of something that smelled that wonderful, she really wanted to try it. And so I got her a biscuit with butter on it, and they poured sorghum that was still hot from the process onto this biscuit. And she's so excited about this. And she takes a bite, and it was like the sudden betrayal of, what are you doing to me? Um, it was horrifying to her. But sorghum was one of those natural sweeteners that we managed to keep. We still manage to have it today. We don't have it quite as spread wide. Now it's more of an ingredient, but think of all the pies and that little bit of cornbread that you want sweet, or barbecue sauce, these little items. Sorghum is very, very important to our previous generations, and trying to get the idea out there that sorghum is this big thing today is it's a bit of a challenge, but that's the education that I want to spread.
I remember when I was young, my dad used to get up late at night. He'd crumble some cornbread in a glass. He'd pour buttermilk over it and eat it with a green onion. And I'm always like, what are you doing? And he's like, you wouldn't get it. It's an Arkansas thing. He goes, you wouldn't understand. So what is that about? Do you know anything about that?
My grandfather on my mother's side was a third shift worker at Reynolds Aluminum, and he would eat dinner with the family each night. That's when he would get up and he'd go to work. And when he'd come home in the morning, he would get himself a glass, and he would put cornbread that Nana had made into the glass and pour the buttermilk in and just eat it with a spoon. And then he'd go to bed. My mom, from time to time, will still do this. It is a particular sort of flavor that just seems inherent. And I keep finding this in my parents' generation and their parents' generation. You don't see it so much with my generation, sadly, because it seems to have gone out of vogue. But think of it this way: you have a cornmeal and it has been cooked. This is our version of cream of wheat. It's one of the two dishes that are very particular to this Arkansas aesthetic that can be seen this way. And I've replicated this. I talk about this in Arkansas Food a bit, because that was a big memory for me. And still to this day, we'll go over to my mother's house, and she will have just finished a glass of cornbread and buttermilk. It is a flavor that was cheap. It was easy to produce. It was heartwarming. It was wonderful. And the only thing that comes close to it in my mind, it's also the whole cream of wheat idea or oatmeal thing, is rice. Because growing up, my grandmother, if there was rice left over from the night before, a quick breakfast that she would serve me was taking rice and putting cream or milk in it and a bit of sugar. And it was wonderful. So I see these correlations. It's the whole idea of your dairy starch breakfast. It's people have cereal and oatmeal today, but this is very particular. And I find it so particular to Arkansas that I figure these are definitely points of our cuisine that aren't replicated other places that need to be preserved. So yes, I've made my daughter up rice and sugar and cream for breakfast, and she absolutely adores it. And I realize that on the carb spectrum, it's terrible for her, but it's just that idea. I find the only place I've seen that replicated anywhere is in our communities of Mexican immigrants that come up. They have a very similar breakfast dish that's usually spiced with cinnamon and with butter, and ours not so much. I mean, we just like it kind of plain. But yeah, these are particular things. They are traditional foods. When it comes to the whole idea of the cornbread, though, I think it may go back to our Native American ancestors, because you did have cornmeal that was mixed with water and sometimes milk that was a regular staple food. But I haven't done enough research yet for me to definitively say that. So it's something I'm looking into. And that's something I try to express to people. I don't know everything about Arkansas food yet. I've only been researching it for about 16 years now, specifically, but my education grows every day. And it's not just the books. It's not just looking at historical imagery or visiting museums or going to sites. It's literally hearing stories from people every single day and knitting this all together into a narrative that I can share and I can express to others. This is our cuisine. Let's celebrate our cuisine. Let's preserve our cuisine. So it's kind of a mission.
I love that. I was going to ask you, you were the host of an Emmy-nominated documentary, Make Room for Pie, and this is a delicious slice of the natural state. Talk to me about why you chose this topic for a book, and why is pie so important in Arkansas cuisine?
Well, the initial book was Arkansas Pie, my very first book. It came out in 2012. That by the time, so 2012, I actually started working for the Arkansas Department of Parks and Tourism. I was a communications manager, and surprisingly, my job was not to share the gospel of Arkansas food. That would come later. In fact, led to me leaving the department for a conflict of interest, because I didn't think it was fair for me to use the state resources to promote culinary tourism and also be an author. But to bring it back, I had written several articles about pie. There was this great interest, starting with Serious Eats. I'd done a cover story with the Arkansas Times. I'd collected a lot of information. In June of 2012, I was approached by History Press because they were interested in having me write a book about food in Arkansas. They were expanding a brand new palette called American Palette. Sorry, a brand new imprint called American Palette. And they had literally started at the top of their list and put in state's name and food. And when they got to Arkansas food, because I had been so prolific and had been tenacious about getting my work in as many publications as possible, I came up in every single entry on the first 3 pages of Google search. So they contacted me and said, "Hey, would you like to write a book?" And honestly, becoming an author has always been a dream, but I thought it would have been. I've written the great American novel, like a lot of people do. They asked me if I would submit some proposals, and I submitted 4. They came back to me and said, "Hey, which of these can you write in 30 days?" And I'm like, I guess it'll have to be on pie. And so the month of August 2012, as soon as I'd get off work each day, I'd go home and I would assemble stories I'd written before. I would write new content. And every Friday I'd get off work and I would drive a direction and just go take pictures of pie and experience this and put it all together. And in November of 2012, Arkansas Pie, Delicious Slice of the Natural State came out. It was followed by 2 other books. And by the time that 3rd book had come out, the state had turned its attention to starting to promote culinary tourism, and my work was done, and I resigned and went back to writing full time. In early 2016, I was contacted by AETN, which is now Arkansas PBS. And they said, we'd love to do a story about what you do. And that was like throwing spaghetti at the wall, because not only was I writing articles and had written books, I also had picked up public speaking at that point. And I wrote on a lot of different subjects. So trying to figure out what we would do with that was kind of in the air. And then there was interest from Larry Foley, documentary filmmaker, multi-Emmy award-winning producer. I mean, I was in shock that somebody I admired so much was actually asked if he wanted to do a project with PBS, and my name came up. And so in the end of 2016, we all sat down together and talked about, what is it, can we do a story about me? And I'm like, but the story isn't about me, it's about the people that make the food. And we came back to my first book and said, let's do a story about pie makers in Arkansas. We shot over the course of the year in 2017. And that's where Make Room for Pie came from, visiting different pie makers in their kitchens across the state of Arkansas, learning their stories, the stories of the places that they're from, the customers that come for this, and of course, the pies. Now, the funny thing about this is the documentary was based on a book. And then my fourth book was based on the documentary, because I found out on Christmas Eve of 2017 that Arkansas Pie had been taken out of print.
Oh.
And no matter of asking and begging, would History Press take it back into print? They said there's absolutely no interest anymore. The sales have dropped off. And it's been more than 5 years. We are closing that down. And like, well, so I promised PBS that they'd have a premium, and it was supposed to be this book. They were steadfast and said no. And so the day after Christmas, I went on the road determined to write another book. I had 10 weeks. The show was set to debut on March 8th. So I did what I felt I needed to do. If I could write a book initially in 30 days, I could do it again, right? Except it needed to be a different book. It couldn't be the same book. It had to have different photography. It had to have different stories. I went across the state, and I literally would get up in the morning and head out a direction, and I would know what my first pie was. I would go to that place. I would sit down. I would order a cup of water and a piece of pie. And when the pie was brought to me, I'd go ahead and ask for the check in the box. I would take pictures of the pie from as many angles as possible, get it all set up, natural light. And then I would take one bite of the pie, and I would write down what I thought about it. And by that point, the check had come, and I put the pie in the box. I'd pay the check. I'd get in the car, and I'd ask my phone, hey, Google, restaurants near me open now, menu pie. And it would pop up some results, and I would call these restaurants that had pie on their menu. And I wouldn't say, hey, do you have any pie? I'd say, what kind of pie do you have today? And if they told me they didn't have any, I didn't even stop there. But if they did, I went and I repeated the cycle again, up to 22 times a day. I would stay the night in different locations, and I just kept going and going. And by February 14th, Valentine's Day, I had enough to put together a book, and I had 3 weeks to do it and no publisher. So I taught myself self-publishing, which sounds absolutely ridiculous now, but I tried using a couple different programs and settled with Adobe InDesign. And on March 6th, I managed to send this 300-page book off to be printed, and went on the air on March 8th with a dummy copy in my hands to say, hey, here's this book full of, it was a cover that one of the producers there had put on a book about funerary rites. So I couldn't open the book, but I had to cover this book to show people. And on March 28th, I had it in my hands. And I didn't realize at the time how much that was going to open everything up. I just thought, I managed to save my promise and provide a premium for PBS viewers and it changed everything. It changed everything.
It seems today that so often I'm hearing stories like this, like the authors really have to kind of go to extra lengths to sell their book and get it out there. I think in the old, I mean, you see in films like somebody just writes a book and everything's done for them, and that's really not the case today. Do you feel like it's really hard work to be an author? Even when the book is done, have so much work left. Is that correct?
It is. And what's funny about it is that my partner actually says, hey, you just make more work for yourself, which is kind of true. But even being published by a traditional publisher initially, it was still, the onus was on me to make the TV appearances and to put out the press release to people. I mean, they provided a press release and I looked at it and went, nope, that's not it, and wrote my own and sent it out there. My experience as a television producer gave me insight into what other television producers would want, and my extensive friendships that I had made in the business through years of working in television and then radio and then print really paid off. I was very fortunate in that. When I went to start Tawny Press, which is my which is my micro press, and I now print for myself and for others. I had to learn all the tools and I had to learn all the tricks, everything from how do you obtain a Library of Congress number or an ISBN to how do you get your publication reviewed? What does it take to do these things? And then the nitty gritty. How much do you charge for your book? And why do you publish your own book instead of seeking out publishers? I found it was actually lucrative to publish a book myself and get it out there, far more than what I was getting with my publisher, where I'd get less than $1 a book and would go years between royalty checks. So it's a lot different. If you're willing to put the tenacity into, if you're willing to push and do all the things, you can put out an incredible product that looks professional, because it is professional. You are a professional whenever you decide to jump in with this with both feet. I have learned everything from layout and design to the simple marketing basics to the little bits of algorithm in how you go about putting something to a publisher. Like for the print service that I use, I know that I need to bump up the reds in everything I do, because their reds in the printer that they use for my books tends to mute everything down.
Yeah.
It's every little bit, and it takes so much. I also do all my own photography. I do my research. I obtain the images from past restaurants or home cooks, and I have to go and do all of that myself. And people tell me straight out, they're like, wow, how do you manage to get it done? And when I try to remind them, this is my full-time job. I did manage to put out 8 books in 4 years, and I was nuts, especially the last of those 4 years, where I also produced a documentary. What was I thinking?
That sounds like a lot of work right there. It sounds like
Oh,
I'm really impressed by that, because I know what you're talking about when you say
yeah,
that. And I'm
yes.
like, holy crap.
See, that was an accident too, but I'm sure we will get to talking about Arkansas dairy bars here in just a moment.
Yep. Wow. Now I want to ask you, while we're still on the topic of pie,
Yeah.
I'm a kind of a pie aficionado. I love pie, and I've been all over the United States with my parents, who are truckers, and got to sample it in different locations. What is a quintessentially Arkansas pie?
Fried pies. I mean,
Oh,
if I have to name a single type of pie, I would actually say fried pies, because it is universal. You can put anything into a fried pie. And it comes from restaurant culture, it comes from local culture, it comes from speed and ease. I mean, to bake a pie takes time, sure. And while there are many quick pies today, the cream pies and cold pies, to make a warm, quick pie requires some form of heat. To make a fried pie requires a skillet, 10 to 15 minutes tops. So and if you have a deep fryer like at a truck stop, well, it's even quicker than that. And you can put anything in it. Our heritage goes back to the old fashioned, which is a chocolate fried pie that is made not with chocolate chips or baker's chocolate, but with alkaline cocoa powder. It's the same basis as we have for chocolate gravy. But this is cocoa powder, butter, and confectioner's sugar that is mixed together and then put into a pocket of pie dough, which is just flour and butter and water. And pushing this together and crimping the edges with a fork and putting it into a skillet. It's so very simple. And it's not all you can do. You can put fresh fruit in, you can put a dried fruit that you have macerated, you can put jam in it. There's so many options, and you find it every corner of the state. You see fried pies. Usually you will see apple, cherry, peach, apricots, chocolate, and coconut. And these are endemic. We also here in Arkansas have the world's only nonprofit fried pie maker, which sounds insane, but honest to goodness, it's wonderful. It's called Flywheel Pies. And Flywheel Pies started out in Prescott, Arkansas, and it was a gentleman who sold meat from a truck around a circuit in Southwest Arkansas and North Texas. His wife made fried pies, and he would take them along and give them to clients, just a little lagniappe, as it were. And people said, well, y'all should make and sell these. And eventually they did. Years down the road, whenever they go to retire, they sold the business to Independent Case Management, which is a group, a nonprofit that works with developmentally disabled adults who are needing jobs. Sold the company for $1. The individual who was working with them, Stephen Hitt, actually went to City of Prescott and said, so I got sold this company, but I don't have a place to do this. I need a location where we can make fried pies. And so the City of Prescott made him $1 a year offer to use the city's former middle school cafetorium. And so there's only about a dozen employees of this operation. There's 2 women who shift back and forth between who makes the fillings each day. There's a guy that comes in and he makes boxes. There's Stephen, who goes around the state. Even he's retired, but he still works for them. He shares these pies out. He distributes them from a truck, a van. There's a secretary, there's a president, and then there's these women. There's 8 women. They stand at a table. It's H-shaped table. 2 women are at the head of the table, and they pull dough balls out, and they roll them out and put them on saucers, like the same kind of saucer you have your coffee from. And they slide them over. The next 2 women put the filling in, and they just lightly fold it over. The next 2 women at the table press the ear out and cut the edge. And the last 2 women have a fork each, and they crimp the edges of each pie, and they lift it and they set it on a pan to be frozen. They have been offered automation. They have been offered automatic crimpers and dough rollers, and the employees say, no, we'll lose the nature of the pie. We want these pies to be handmade and wonderful. Flywheel Pies, last I checked, are in 68 of Arkansas' 75 counties. They're served at all sorts of restaurants, and they're served at football games, and they're used as fundraisers because you can order the frozen pies and fry or bake them yourself. And it's an extraordinary thing. And it only works because we have such this nature for fried pie in Arkansas. In fact, I've seen this transaction so many times. I go into a country diner or a family restaurant or someplace where there's an agricultural community. And there's always, we call them liars clubs, because it's the group of gentlemen and sometimes ladies who get together at one table for lunch. They've known each other for years, and they sit around and they tell stories. And we call it liars club because it's how big was the fish. And you'll see them talking, and they keep talking when they get up to go to the register to pay before they go back to their jobs, whether they're on a farm, or they're going to work in a bank or a warehouse or Walmart or wherever they're going. And there will be fried pies by the register, usually wrapped in wax paper or cellophane. And there's no words for this transaction. You will just see this person pick up the fried pie and put it in front of them as they're talking to their friends, or they're talking to the wait staff, and their ticket is done up and they pay for their order and they slip this fried pie into their pocket. And later in the afternoon, they'll eat this when they're sitting on the combine or when they're taking their coffee break. It's endemic to what we have as far as food culture here, that it's natural to eat some pie. I mean, if you go inside a restaurant and say, I'm going to have cake with my lunch, people might look at you like you're crazy. But nobody blinks an eye if you order a slice of pie or a fried pie.
Now you're bringing back memories. My grandmother was from Texas. She used to make them. And if I just walked into my grandmother's house and I smelled the smell of hot Crisco, I knew I was going to get to have a pie. It's still the most magical thing to this day. It just makes me just smile thinking about it.
And fried pies serve another function compared to regular pies. If you turn on the oven, you heat up the house. Right. Until my generation, and even now in some places in the state, air conditioning is not a guarantee. So the last thing you want to do when it's pushing 100 degrees outside is heat up the whole dadgum house.
Yeah, I feel like they always made it in the summertime, as far as I remember. My grandmother would always make apricot. I don't really, once or twice she'd make dried apple ones, but mostly it was apricot. I think that was the most popular one she made.
And it was something that all of the ingredients, because if you use Crisco instead of butter, all of the ingredients are shelf stable. Yeah. So it's something that could be made at any time. It's the same idea behind the funeral pie, which you hear versions of the funeral pie all across the South. Now, Southern tradition is whenever somebody loses a family member, the community comes together and they provide sustenance. They will bring casseroles and they will bring, they'll bring hearty dishes that can be eaten hot or cold, and they bring pies. And it's not a celebration of death so much as a continuation of the community itself. You want to sustain your fellow man in grief. So if you happen to have, fresh eggs and milk and stuff, you could make a custard pie. Or if you had fresh fruit, if you were in season, you could make a fresh fruit pie. But death can occur at any time. Death, when you're in the depths of winter, whenever you are at that first burst of spring, you may not have everything that you need, but you're always going to have the Crisco or the oil or the lard. You'll have the flour, and you'll have dried fruit. And in particular, raisins has become the funeral pie that we know today. And it is a simple pie that's very similar to the chess pie, but it is a pie that is based on the dried fruit. And I'm going to be honest with you. If I had to choose an Arkansas pie that I could just eat at any point in time, it's never going to be the funeral pie. I have had good examples of it, and a good example is still a bit too much to me. It's like oatmeal raisin cookies. When you put too many raisins in it, it's just, it's too much. But idea of sustenance, something quick to make, that's where it comes from.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. I want to ask you about your self-produced documentary, Arkansas Dairy Bars, Neat Eats and Cool Treats. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So the pandemic, it changed everything, of course. And at that point in time, I was focusing on restaurant books because while I do write cookbooks now, I am primarily a restaurant writer, which is unusual. Usually in this state, men write about restaurants, women write about cooking. And whenever I came on the scene in 2007, I broke some molds. And I still to this day, from time to time, will have people who will have a bias because they're like, well, wait a minute. This male writer says this about this restaurant. I've overcome a lot of that. But in 2019, I had put out 2 books that were completely about restaurants, 101 Things to Eat in Arkansas Before You Die, and 102 More Things to Eat in Arkansas Before You Die. I was in the process of working on a book on cheese dip and its roots in Arkansas, and I was looking at doing one on catfish. All my projects were based on going out to different places. I'd also been talking with Arkansas PBS about doing a documentary on the budding agritourism industry. And that's still in play, but I talked to them the first week of March of 2020 and very excited about this. And we scheduled a meeting for the last week of March where we were going to talk about staffing and about setting up our suits and get everything together. Instead, last day of March of 2020, I had my very first Zoom session. And it was what are we going to do? We have a hole that we're going to have in our broadcast schedule. And I know this is something that that's later on in the thing, but it's kind of it's a timeline, as it were. That's how Home Cooking with Kat came about, which was the very first that we know of no contact cooking program.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. See, whenever the pandemic happened, I was making a living pretty much. Book sales were tangential, but I was making a living doing public appearances. Had 22 of them scheduled between April and May of 2020. And that second week of March of 2020, I watched every one of them disappear off my schedule. And
that had to be horrible.
It was, I'd had a plan. I had finally figured out what it was I was going to do in my life. I had a schedule and everything dissolved. And I can look at it now and realized I had a bit of a breakdown. I went to my mom's and sort of moved in for a couple of months, and I cooked. My daughter went with me because my mom had better Wi-Fi reception, and my daughter's school had gone online. And so I'd get up each morning, I'd make my kid breakfast, and then I would dive into old cookbooks, and I would dive into writing old memories. And by 6 o'clock every evening, I had a different meal on the table. And I was taking pictures of everything with my cell phone. My partner would come over each day at 6 and have dinner with us and go back home. And I ended up having shoulder surgery, which put me down for a long time. I put together a couple of books during that time, 43 Tables and A Bite of Arkansas. But I was itching to get out there. I wanted to get out so bad. And as soon as there was a vaccine announced, I'm like, as soon as I can do something, I'm going to do something. So January 2021, I'm actually delivering books down to Hot Springs. And I had a craving. And my partner and I are going back to Little Rock. I said, let's go over to Malvern. I want to see if this old dairy bar is there. This place called Mel's, which I'd visited when I was a kid. Not only was Mel's there, it was booming. I mean, there was no room in the lot. We rolled through the drive-through section. It had drive-through and 2-window walk-up, and got our order. And we parked across the street. And I'm just looking at it. I'm looking at it, and it's like there's something in my head about this. And we get home. The next morning, I wake up, and I go walk into my living room, and I say, I need to write a book about dairy bars. And he says, yeah, you absolutely should, because dairy bars were the perfect restaurant to talk about during the pandemic. There's no contact, no direct contact, because all of your food and your order goes through a window. There's a separation. It was the restaurant book I could do and still stay safe during the pandemic. So I immediately got to work. We actually hopped in the car and went down to Sheridan and went to the Yellow Jacket drive-in down there. And I took some pictures, and I just kept thinking, okay, how many dairy bars can there be? Maybe there's 50 or 60. I scoured through all the things that I'd done before, and I started doing my research, which sometimes it's literally going to Google Maps and pulling down and looking at names of restaurants and clicking into different restaurants on the map and going, okay, what does this serve? And then making phone calls and asking questions. And I ended up finding 98 different dairy bars across the state of Arkansas. And I started visiting every single one of them, collecting information for this book. I couldn't do it as quick as pie because it's not a matter of just going to get in the pie, because the hamburger takes a little more time than slicing a piece of pie that was made a couple of hours before. So I was going to 6 to 8 restaurants a day and asking questions and taking the pictures and shooting a lot of food on trays on the dash of my car. A couple of months go by. I'm about halfway through this book. I'm very excited about it. And I get a call from Arkansas PBS and said, so we're ready to start production again, and we wanted to revisit this thing with the farms. Do you think they're still open? I'm like, I can't do this right now. I'm in the middle of writing a book about dairy bars. And they said, that sounds great. Let's do it.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay. And so I went to the production company that I was supposed to be working with on the agritourism thing and said, hey, so they pulled the trigger on this, but it's going to be about dairy bars instead of agritourism. And my production company said, we can't right now. We're working on putting together a museum, which sounds crazy. I get off the phone and I'm just like, what am I going to do? Because here it is the middle of March, and they wanted to air this initially on June 6th. That wasn't going to work. After some thought, I thought, well, I've done television, I've done radio. Certainly I can do a film. I understand how to edit. So I hired a cinematographer, and we went out and we shot for 3 weeks at dairy bars across the state. We actually shot at 14 locations to do the full story, but in between, we would get video here and there. There was one place outside of the Charleston Dairy Diner. We're taking pictures of the outside, and he's shooting some video, and the owner comes out with a, what in the world are you doing? And we ended up interviewing her, and she's actually in the production. And we went all over the place. We went all the way down to DeWitt. We went up to Rogers. We went down to Louisville and El Dorado, and up to Paragould. And 3 weeks, shot all this video, and my cinematographer gives me a hard drive and it's like, here you go. And I have 6 weeks, and I bought a gaming computer so that I had something with speed, and I had it on one knee and my laptop on the other and a monitor, and I sat in a recliner for 6 weeks and put this thing together. And whenever I was done at night, whenever I could not go any further and I was about to pass out, I'd hand off the computer I was editing on to my partner, and he would do color correction through the night. So everything that I had edited together was color balanced so that I could start the next day and keep putting these segments together. And we managed to make the deadline, and we delivered it and whenever I took it in for delivery, I didn't realize they'd actually pushed it off to air in August. But the work wasn't done. I was immediately back on the road and finishing the book, because you had to have a book to come out with it. And it kicked me in the butt. I made some mistakes. I did it for an incredibly small budget that I look back now, I'm like, what was I even thinking that I could produce a film on this sort of budget? It's more than twice as long as Make Room for Pie. It was really hard, but the finished product I mean, I can honestly say this is something I did from beginning to end, even up to syncing in the music, even to making the conversation choices, even doing the audio levels. I can now say I did it. I don't think I'll ever do anything like that again. Certainly not for as little money. Certainly it's not short a timetable, but it was an education. It also wore me out. I did take in July of 2021, I actually took 12 days and dropped the whole project and dropped my daughter off at Girl Scout camp and went to the Writers Colony at Eureka Springs, the Writers Colony at Dairy Hollow, which is a fantastic facility that was created by Crescent Dragon Wagon, who really is the pinnacle of Arkansas food writing. She really broke down all the barriers so that, she walked so I could fly. And I spent 12 days there cooking all these dishes from these cookbooks that I've been researching while I was stuck at home during the pandemic. I cooked 107 of them, 103 are in the book. 4 of them turned out terrible. Took pictures, served the food to the other writers up there. It was great. Came back home and I finished Dairy Bars. And I was so exhausted by the time I finished both books. I couldn't write anything else for months. It was exhausting. Fortunately, Dairy Bars had long tail. Usually when I put out a book, there's 3 or 4 months, it's the hot story. It's the big thing. It's the most important thing out there. Everybody wants to know about it. I'm on TV, I'm on the radio, I'm making appearances. And then it swells and it goes down. The majority of the books get sold right then, more get sold at the holidays, and then it plateaus and evens out. But not with Dairy Bars. Whenever I finished it, I felt I was lucky to have finished doing a documentary. Then I had people say, hey, can we show it? Can we do this? It ended up, it was shown at the Made in Arkansas Festival. I threw it out to a couple of places just to say, hey, what's going on? And it started winning awards. Weird awards. It was the best documentary, feature documentary for the Stranger Days International Film Festival in South Carolina. It was the winner at the Mannheim Film Festival. It's like, what's going on? In America, it was just like, oh, it's something on TV, but it's like, what? It ended up even getting me an Emmy nomination for host, which still blows my mind. I was in television producing the #1 rated morning show in the Little Rock market for years, but I get nominated for a documentary that I just put together on a spit and a shine and a whistle and hope that it was all going to work out. So yeah, it was extraordinary. And I'm glad that it's helped elevate, because people have done like they did with my pie book, like they've done with 101 Things. They've taken the book and they've made it their tour guide. They take this property or this $30 book and they read it through, and then they stick it in their glove compartment. And then when they're out in the state, they pull it out and they look at the maps, which I learned how to draw maps with Dairy Bars too. That was great. They look at this book and they're like, I'm in Fort Smith. Oh, I can go to the Yellow Umbrella, or I could go to Bonnie's Dairy Freeze. Oh, well, I'm in Jonesboro. Well, I've got to go to Presley's. To be able to have that available not only helps me sell books, frankly, but it helps those businesses. I firmly believe that all boats rise with the tide. And whenever it comes to Arkansas and its culinary scene, its tourism scene, with tourism, the idea is put heads in beds, because if somebody stays overnight, they're going to go to an attraction. And I take it further. They're going to go dine out, because what do you do when you're on vacation?
Right,
you
exactly.
throw the diet out the window. You go and you eat breakfast somewhere, and you go and eat the local cuisine for dinner, and you have a snack, and it's part of the experience. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm glad that Dairy Bars is sticking around the way that it has, just the same way as my pie books have, because it means more money gets pumped into our local economy. It stays in the state, and it helps these businesses keep going. And consequently, that means that these businesses continue to produce these great Arkansas dishes that they need to be producing to keep our culinary heritage going. So there you go.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, I went on a road trip yesterday, and we based our travels on some dining experiences, and I think everybody does that. And I think it's so much nicer to have the ability to be informed rather than just kind of getting happenstance and not knowing what you're going to get. And if you hear that something's particularly awesome, you're going to say, well, let's make a detour here and go to this little area because it's going to be way better, and it's really worth
Right.
your time. But I also think too, it must have been a huge, especially during this time period, it must have been a huge lifeline for many of these restaurants who are probably struggling during the pandemic. Am I correct?
For some of them, absolutely. For others, this is very strange. And it was something I discovered while doing the interviews. And I'm going to tell you, the first time that I walked into a kitchen, actually walked into a building, it was the Dairyette down in Mount Ida. And I walked in, and I have to take off my mask to do this interview. It scared the crap out of me because I had all sorts of concerns. I didn't want to bring anything home to my family. I didn't want to spread it from restaurant to restaurant. But the Dairyette had to close its dining room. It only opened here just a few months ago. But what they saw was they still have the volume is going out the window. Well, I went to DeWitt and did Troy's and talked to Stephanie down there. They had 4 employees that were there. They couldn't hire anybody in. They capsulated themselves off. They only were at work or with their families this whole time. Troy's had the biggest problem of all because their volume tripled because there were no other places that people could go in Little DeWitt, Arkansas, and just pick up something to eat. And a lot of these dairy bars saw that during the early months of the pandemic. As things progressed in 2021 with inflation rising, and sure, there were some places opening up, but we start seeing the shortages. Then these locations really started to feel a pinch. But having that extra boost from having the publicity really, really helped keep them going. And there's places where I have a bit of sadness about me because the dairy bar survived, but maybe the local diner didn't.
Right.
And some of the dairy bars ended up going out anyway. Dice Drive-In in Lamar and Dee's Drive-In in Cold Hill, a few others, they didn't make it. This was a hard time, but we may have lost 10 to 12% of our restaurants. New York City at one point, they lost a third to 40% of the restaurants. Arkansas did so much better, and partially because of the atmosphere here, people were not quite as. Now, I don't want to go into the politics of that.
Yeah.
Let's just leave it at that. But no, it did help the restaurants, but it seemed to help them more on the back end after the documentary was out, after the book was out, than it did on the front end. The very nature of dairy bars is what kept them going in the first place.
Right. Now, I wanted to ask you, jumping into this from this, previous question, you also edited and contributed to the collection, 43 Tables, an internet community dines during quarantine. Can you talk to us about this as well?
So in the early months of the pandemic, when everything is shutting down, I had so many people across my friends list across the United States on Facebook. And what I saw was that for the first time in years and sometimes decades, there were individuals who were at home and they were dealing with limited availability of what they had available to cook with, but also they had an abundance of time. And of course, the big cliche was everybody was baking bread. I was one of the few that wasn't, but I start seeing all of these people on my Facebook feed, and they're not just baking bread, but they're going back to the dishes of their youth and family
Right.
dishes, and they're recreating these, and they're taking pictures of them, and they're sharing recipes, and it was glorious. And I thought, okay, we're all a bit bummed right now. What can I do to make this a little bit better? And so I just threw out there and said, hey guys, why don't we put a book together? Why don't y'all send me your recipes and we'll create a book? And the reason it's called 43 Tables is that it's 43 of my friends that sent me recipes to put in this book. And as it developed, I was expecting a lot of subsistence cooking, and I did get that from some people, like use of sorrel and how to use a chicken and stuff like that. But then I had friends that were sending me Yorkshire puddings and tagine and these really complex dishes that I would not have expected. And they're sending me pictures off their cell phone. So challenge accepted. I decided I'm going to use my layout skills and I'm going to create this book. And I interspersed it with little peeks into what life was like right then. It's turned into this crazy period piece. So I talk about that last visit that I made in person to Kroger for a while, where there was a guy that was out front who had an amp, and he was playing Hallelujah while inside there was nothing on the shelves, and this whole feeling of doom and what it was like to be stuck inside my house and have the cats watching me. And my daughter was like, okay, I think maybe it's time for me to learn how to cook. And the first thing she wants to learn how to make is s'mores. I was like, well, I don't have a campfire, but I have a gas stove.
It works.
And bringing this whole idea together, I ended up assembling the book with my left hand. I had I'd collected all these recipes, and I had started my formation, and I had my surgery, which I thought I was going to be down for 6 weeks, and I was down for 6 months.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I could not move my arm for 2 months, completely immobilized, got to be really skinny. It was crazy. But it was so that all the tissue could heal and redevelop from the procedure I had done. And so I learned I can type 35 words a minute with my left hand, 90 with both. And so I put together 43 tables with my left hand for my friends. I priced it really low. The goal was just, this is for fun. I'm not worried about making money off of this. I just want to be able to send something to these people that are in my life and be able to share, hey, this is where we were. This is a memento. Something good came out of all of this.
I love that. Now, I want to ask you, you received the honor of being named Best Author in the 2022 Arkansas Times Reader's Choice Awards. What would that feel like for you to get that award?
It was completely out of the blue. I was not expecting it at all. I did not know I was a nominee. I worked for the Arkansas Times, with Eat Arkansas and with writing all the restaurant reviews that they offer for several years. And it was an interesting time. I rarely ever went into the office. I rarely ever saw anybody from staff, but I was, on my own, and I had their support, and that was great. So here it is, nearly 15 years after starting to write. And I kind of gotten to the point where I realized, okay, I'm not going to be Stephen King. I'm not going to even be Ina Garten or Alton Brown. I've got this little niche, and people like my work, but it's not like I'm going to come to anybody's mind. I found out that I had received the recognition because a friend of mine who has moved to New England posted it on his Facebook and tagged me and was doing the big congratulations. I'm like, for what? Whenever I actually started letting people know, yeah, this happened to me, the outpouring from people, the outpouring from folks that had been reading my work for all these years, it was heartening. because when you're freelance, whenever you're an independent contractor, self-employed, you're out on the road, your job, where your workplace is a vehicle, where your laptop can be anywhere. It's lonely.
Yeah.
You don't have many sounding boards out there. And when I posted this, I'm just utterly surprised. I mean, this is a recognition that folks usually give to John Grisham,
Right.
or to Charmaine Harris. And like, I felt kind of like Sally Field. It's like, you like me, you really like me.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's given me new energy, and it came at probably the most valuable time. See, I didn't put out a book in 2022 because first week of May last year, my mom's house burned to the ground. I mean, nothing left between roof and foundation. It was just gone.
Jeez, that's horrible.
To me, the most important thing right then wasn't where I was in my career. It was I needed to be there for my mom, and so I took off. I quit my job, as it were. I spent 3 months just helping mom work through the insurance and making sure she was okay and trying to right her place in the world. And when I came out of that, I spent some time working on my partner's business, working with my daughter to help her achieve her Girl Scout Silver Award. I almost walked away from this. I mean, sure, I had some public appearances here and there, but it didn't seem as important to write. When I did decide to start again, my partner actually, October of this year, comes to me. It's like, so are you going to write any more books? I'm like, I'm sure I'm going to. And he's like, but you need to be writing one now. And I realized, well, yeah, because every year in October, I would put out a book, and then I put out another one in December. And there was this pattern to it. And like, no, I'm going to take my time this time. And so I gave myself roughly 6 months and sat down and looked at everything. It's like, I could do a documentary. I could write this book on catfish that I'm going to do a documentary with. I'm going to do cheese dip. I'm going to do barbecue. I'm going to do all these things. And it took sitting down and going, no, I just need to do one thing. And I needed to get back to my roots. And that's where my latest project came from. It's called The Great Arkansas Pie Book. I'm going back to that well again. The first book I wrote, Arkansas Pie, was a book of essays about pie makers. The second one, Another Slice of Arkansas Pie, a guide to the best restaurants, bakeries, truck stops, and food trucks for delectable bites in the natural state. And yes, that is the whole title, because I didn't know what I was doing, and that's the entire title in the Library of Congress listing. But I wrote it, and it's a guide, 475 places to find pie in Arkansas. One thing people had kept asking me over the years was, hey, can you give me this recipe? Do you know the recipe for this restaurant's pie? Do you remember this restaurant? What kind of pies did we used to make compared to what pies we have now? And to have all of these research. And I decided, okay, it's time to get up and do this again. And so I have spent the past several months not only doing the research and doing the writing, but going twice now to the Writers' Colony at Dairy Hollow. I'm spending 2 weeks at a time baking pies, relearning crust. I mean, it had become so automatic on how to make a pie crust in my mind. I had to dissect that. It's like, well, how do I make a crust? I had a day where I thought I was going to have a bit of a fit, because no crust that I touched would turn out. I'm like, I'm not giving into this. I've got to figure out where the disconnect is. Why can't I translate how to make this? I went and I played with schmaltz. I rendered schmaltz from chicken that I roasted myself and used it to make pie crust. And this act, and it sounds crazy just spitting out there, it's like, Well, I decided to go and throw some chicken fat into some flour. And I did it because the research took me to 18th century English settlers in the Ozarks and how they subsisted, and the fact that pie was so much a part of their diet. But their pie was savory pie because you had one day that you cooked the fresh meat that had just been butchered, and the next day you took what was left and you cast it in a pie, because it was this way to preserve the meat just a little bit longer so that you had that much more just to share with your family. And to learn these cooking methods by trying them out myself, by spending the time in the dough, with the ovens, with the ingredients. I actually made a meat pie based on a recipe from 1820 that was my partner's brisket that he had smoked and sent with me as a care package. It had this lovely ribbon of fat through the brisket. And I took that ribbon of fat out and I diced it and I made pastry crust from it. And I filled it with this smoked meat that he had done. And there was something about that cherry wood that he'd used to smoke it, the different methods. And it opened my eyes to how
Mhm.
pie should work. I actually ended up making a rabbit pie that was based on a recipe from 1971 from a cookbook from Booger Hollow, which was a tourist attraction where everything
Mhm.
was written in Arkan speak, as in it was written to sound like hillbilly speak. And I thought, when I saw this recipe for rabbit pie, I thought, okay, I'm sure they're just making it up, because nobody in their right mind is going to make a rabbit pie off of a tourist cookbook, right? And I put that on Facebook and said, well, there's no point in me making it, because while Arkansas does have the world's largest rabbit meat producer, Pelfrey's, it's located in Springdale, domestic rabbit is not the same as wild rabbit. I went and hunt and harvested my own wild rabbit whenever I was a kid and made rabbit and dumplings. But it's different. It's like a commercial duck that you get that's produced is very different from wild duck that's shot out over the Arkansas Delta. And I'm joking about this on Facebook, and a friend of mine pops up and says, hey, so I got a rabbit and it's in my freezer. Would you like it? And it
Nice.
was like, got called on my own joking. And so I ended up at 2:00 in the morning, the last day I'm at Ryder's Colony, taking this rabbit that I had deboned and set aside and kept thinking, I'm not going to get to it. I mean, that's crazy. Why would I do that? And going, no, I need to do this. And taking it and stewing it with onions and spices and making a transparent crust that I laid into this ceramic handmade pie plate in 3 layers and put this in there, made with the aspic that I had also rendered from chicken bones and the rabbit bones. And I made this up and put it in the oven and fell asleep and woke up to this scent going, oh my gosh, that smells amazing. But it's no, there's no way it's that good. And take it out and to take the pictures and to cut the slice and thinking, I'm going to have to tweak these. I know it's going to have to tweak it, because so many of the pie recipes that I had pulled, I'd had to change the measurements, or I'd had to explain some different things. And here it comes. And here's this pie. And I've cut the slice and it smells good. And so I try it and I realize this is not a joke. They knew what they were doing. It
Yeah,
was,
that sounds delicious to me.
it was, it was so very good. And I could just put a cookbook out there that should say, here's a recipe for rabbit pie. But instead, there's 6 pages in my upcoming book that talk about Booger Hollow and the fact that I used to stop there on the way up, and about this cookbook that I'd had for years, this little thin yellow cookbook that was sold as a tourist track. They just wanted money out of your pocket, right?
Right.
And here it is. It's a couple years older than I am, and it has this recipe that dates back who knows how long. The recipe actually includes the instructions. While it's cooking, go out and set the trap again. And it's perfect.
That's brilliant. I love that.
So that's what I'm trying to impart and share. I mean, there's a lot of recipes that's just a recipe, but I talk about things like Frankie's Cafeteria, which closed sadly during the pandemic after more than 100 years of service. It was the oldest cafeteria in the state, opened in 1919, and it was so well known for this egg custard pie. And all these cookbooks. I mean, I have more than 500 Arkansas church and community cookbooks in my collection. And all these different cookbooks have slightly different recipes for it. It's going in there and experimenting and trying to find the right one. And I think maybe I've done it because secret was in the crust. The crust is different. Like, okay. And to be able to talk about the company's Come Pie and why, for years people said, oh, it's a state pie of Arkansas. And it's not. It's the pie of the Arkansas sesquicentennial. It was denoted such by then Governor Bill Clinton back in 1986. Because they were doing a tourism campaign that year. Companies coming, and this pie had that name. It was at Cliff House Inn, so it gets that name. But there's never been a state dessert or pie or anything like that determined by the legislature, which actually makes those decisions. So I talk about that, and I talk about the two pies that really make the claim right now to be the Arkansas state pie, this pie, and then the Arkansas possum pie served by Rob Nelson at Tuscan Trotter up in Bentonville, which was cited by People magazine as the best pie in the state of Arkansas. And it leads into other things, like the work that I do as co-chair of the Arkansas Pie Festival, which strangely enough was based on the documentary, which was based on the book that I wrote back in 2012. Crazy. 2019, we started the Arkansas Pie Festival in Cherokee Village, Arkansas, which came after a call from Jonathan Rhodes, up there, who was like, can we have your permission to have a pie festival? And I'm like, I don't own pie. But this thing was, I mean, it was created and it was wonderful. And I was able to develop this with Jonathan and Grayson Biggers and this wonderful collection of individuals up in Cherokee Village. We had the festival in 2019. It was a huge success. Then we couldn't have it for 2 years because of COVID, and then came back this past year and had almost 1,000 people show up for this pie festival. And here it comes. We're getting ready to do it again. And just to be able to develop this and do this extraordinary thing, and I get to talk about that. And the best part is this book, the Great Arkansas Pie Book, gets to come out. The very first copies will be on the table at the festival that day. It feels like pie is my circle of life at this point, because
what date is that? When will that be out?
It will be at the festival on April 29th, and nationwide release and hardback will be May 2nd.
Excellent. We'll put links to that in the bio.
Excellent. I love that. It's just, I never thought pie would have this big an influence on my life. I mean, I've eaten it my whole life, but now I feel I have this connection to this dish, which it's a simple dish, but it's all the things. The personal pie that I have in the Great Arkansas Pie Book is actually a mushroom pie. It's a pie that's made with mushrooms and onions and cheeses, and it's based, of all things, on a 14th century recipe from a book called the Gentleman of Paris. It is an instruction book that a guy in Paris in the 14th century wrote for his new young bride, saying, this is how I like things, based on his life with his previous wife who had passed. And it includes a recipe for mushroom pie. And I first made that pie in the context of a medieval recreation with the Society for Creative Anachronism back in, I have to think, 2004. And I fell in love with the combination, and I've refined it, and I've replaced some of the ingredients. So mine includes things like Worcestershire sauce. And this particular pie has kind of become my potluck dish. This is the dish that people want me to bring to gatherings and all. And it's wonderful. It's a savory, but it's not a meat pie. And it has these deep roots, but it's still pie. Pie is simple, and yet it's extraordinary. And I didn't realize it was going to end up bookending so much of this career in my life, this career that I started at 33 after thinking I was going to spend the rest of my life working in television as a producer behind the scenes. It's wonderful. And to this date, I've only met 2 people that said they didn't like pie. But both of those people, after they tried different pies that I sort of pushed at them because, hey, you should try this, came around. And there's something wonderful about that. Some people break bread. I just cut another slice.
Do you have a favorite pie?
Outside the mushroom pie. Now, it all depends on the context. If you're talking about restaurant pie.
Yeah, like if you go to a diner, what's your favorite?
So there's a place in Harrisburg called Gavin's Downtown. Downtown Harrisburg doesn't have much. It has the courthouse, it has a laundromat, it has a lot of empty spaces, and then it has Gavin's. And you walk into Gavin's and you could be in any mid-range downtown revitalized restaurant across the United States. It looks like, but they have this case of pies. And in that case, they have a strawberry pie, and it's a strawberry cream pie. So it has that cream cheese base, and it's got the strawberries on it, and they use a shortbread crust. And it's like a strawberry shortcake, and it's astounding. And yes, I can make a pie that's very similar to it, but I'd rather go up there and sit in that restaurant and have this one slice. It's so good. In fact, when I was writing another slice of Arkansas pie, I got there in the middle of the day, took my bite and put it in the box and stuff. That particular night, I ended up at the Ramada in West Memphis, Arkansas, in between, coming back from the North Delta, going into the South Delta. I woke up in the middle of the night craving that pie, went to my car, dug it out of my cooler and brought it in, ate it with my fingers. It was that good.
It sounds that good.
It sounds crazy, but I love that. But there's few pies I don't care for. My daughter's favorite pie is actually a blueberry rhubarb pie from Carol's Lakeview restaurant in Cherokee Village. And there's some good points behind that. And of course, I love Charlotte's Eats and Sweets, nationally recognized. Southern Living magazine said that their coconut meringue pie was the best pie in the South back in 2010. But my pie there is the caramel pie, which is a great burnt sugar pie. I just love all the variations that we have of it. And it's very, very rare, very rare that I meet a pie that I don't like.
Kat, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I've loved getting a chance to talk to you. I hope we get to have you on here again.
Oh, I would love to be on. And anytime I can preach the gospel of Arkansas food, I'm up for it.
That was my conversation with the wonderful author, Kat Robinson. You'll see links to her website and Amazon page in the bio. You're going to want to check them out. There's some wonderful books on there, and her writing is very exciting. She really writes enthusiastically about the food of Arkansas and the history of Arkansas, and it's just really amazing. We're also going to be putting a link to her newest book out when it comes out next week, so look for that as well. Hope you're all having a really great week, maybe even cooking or baking something from one of our guests' cookbooks. Until next week, keep on cooking.